Today we're going to chat about boring workbooks and what is the alternative. And just listen to this. A sigh reverberated across the room as the boy climbed into his chair, fumbled around until he found his pencil and opened his workbook and started writing. He let out a groan about how boring it was. Why? He asked. As I answered, because you have to, I sighed. Why did he have to do the boring workbook? He already knew most of the information. I made him fill out the pages because this is what schoolwork is supposed to look like. The boy was my son. I was supposed to be educating him at home. I chose to homeschooling because I love learning. I have a passion for learning. Yet his sighs and grumbles were teaching me that I was missing something. I think almost every one of us can relate to that. It's happened to us at some point.
Yeah.
And we've had these kids saying why, and they don't want to do these boring activities. So let's talk about why are they so boring and what is the alternative?
Shame. My heart goes out to that mom. I know I've been there years ago when we started, and I can only say thank you that I found Charlotte Mason's delightful way of learning instead. But we come out of a school system and it's familiar to us. So we grab what is most familiar. And exactly as she says in that piece of writing, she loved learning and this is what school looked like. But we have to remember we're not trying to do school. We're trying to nourish and nourish our children's minds and create an environment where learning takes place naturally. I think we often talk about the freedom in learning. So we don't want to make moms think that we throw everything out. There are disciplines involved in learning, but it doesn't need to come in the form of a workbook. And maybe we want to use that as a way to encourage parents to put those workbooks down. There are lots of pitfalls with them. And I think the first thing that we can toss around a bit is the fact that it is what somebody else thinks our children should learn at that time. It's based on a standardized mode of education, which isn't necessarily right for your particular child. So what other pitfalls do you see in workbook-based learning?
I think they are often focusing on snippety facts and snippety bits of information instead, because that's what children need to learn and memorize to pass a test. And our idea of education is that we want to feed children's minds and give them a love of learning and an in-depth knowledge of a particular topic and immerse them in something, not just skim the surface and know a few facts.
Yeah.
And so it's those facts and those little snippets of useless information that kids say, like, why am I learning this? Whereas what I see as the solution is, as we often say, living books, reading aloud with your children and reading books that interest your children, finding topics that delight them. And then instead of filling in the blank and missing words and multiple choice and those kind of things like you get in workbooks, the alternative discipline is to get them to narrate to you regularly, daily, what they have learned from what you've read aloud together. And those narrations can initially be oral, especially with young children or with children who are new to the act of narrating and telling back what they've learned. And then later they can become written. With a younger child, a mother can be the scribe who writes it down for the child. And with older children, you can gradually, encourage them to write a paragraph and then 2 paragraphs. And eventually it's going to become an essay as they get into the higher grades. But it's training them to be able to express what they've learned, to think logically, to formulate language, to actually communicate. That's the skill we're teaching them. But it's on a topic that they love and that they were interested in. So I think that's the big difference.
Yeah. And I think that workbooks and textbooks actually fall into that category that Charlotte Mason calls twaddle. And how she describes twaddle is feeble, much diluted stuff. And she says imagination does not stir when we put that into children's hands. And if we think about the mind and how it feeds and kind of the ideas snowball, if you give your children something good to think about, something wholesome to think about, a challenging piece to read or to listen to, the mind will take over and it'll snowball and it'll come out in all sorts of different ways, whether it is when your kids are young in their play, whether it's when they're older in their own research. But that's what you want to do, give your children a lot of things for them to go down their own pathways of learning, as versus these bits of information just simply to pass a test. There's that quote that we often use, and you probably know it a bit better, that if we the sole purpose in learning is to pass a test, then we've
lost sight of the real reason for learning. Yes, that's a Judy Fulbright one.
Yeah. And I think for me, one of the cautions that I would give to parents who are leaning toward a workbook approach is how much you as a mom are going to miss out. Because if we give our children a stack of books and a timetable with 30 minutes slots to complete all those workbooks, 30 minutes English, 30 minutes this, 30 minutes that, and at the end of the day you tick a block and you say, okay, we've now homeschooled. I would caution parents against that, because what you do is you miss out all the wonderful co-learning that you have. And in fact, I had a mom send me a message the other day that bought a spelling program, and she said she can't believe that working together and playing these games with her children, with their spelling, how much her own spelling has improved. And I think that we look back over our years, and I think our own education was this tiny little drop in this huge ocean compared to what we've learned now as mothers, homeschooling and being involved and reading those storybooks and going on those outings and having just an amazing education. Anything else you want to add to the topic of the joy-sucking workbooks?
I think just the fact that if workbooks are boring, you have to change, because neuroscience, like besides what Charlotte Mason said, modern neuroscience has shown that when children or anybody learning experiences positive emotions, that information filters into the networks of pathways in the brains far more effectively than if they are experiencing negative emotions. So it's actually not just, for the fun of it that we need to make it delightful. It's actually to make it effective that you need to make sure that your children are actually enjoying what they're learning and the way they are learning it. So, there's more than one reason to switch from these boring textbooks and boring workbooks if it's possible.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Well, hope that's encouraging to folks.